Welcome to the Chess Angle. This is not your typical chess podcast. If you're an amateur or club-level player, the Chess Angle is for you. Our content is aimed at busy adults who are serious about the game but have limited study time. Featured guests include both amateur and titled players alike. And now, here's your host, Director of the Long Island Chess Club, Neil Bellon.
Welcome, everyone. A shout out to our sponsor, Chessable.com. Their courses are amazing. There is a link in the show notes as always. Happy New Year to all of you. This is being recorded in early 2023, and I hope this year is blunder-free. All right, that sounded a lot cooler in my head now that I'm saying it. It's a little corny, I guess, but I do wish you all the best with your chess improvement goals for the new year. And hopefully many of you who are starting out in tournaments will find this episode helpful. But I think that even those of you who have some tournament experience will enjoy the discussion. Let's do it. The first thing that I want to mention, and I know I've talked about this before, is the book The Amateur's Mind by I. M. Jeremy Silman. Now, I know I mentioned Silman a lot, and I know I mentioned this book a lot, and longtime listeners of this podcast are probably rolling their eyes right now, like, oh my goodness, he's going to talk about Silman again. But here's the thing, just bear with me. I'm not going to get into the weeds of the book again. I already did that in episode 6. If you want to check that out, that's one of my sort of rapid fire episodes. That's like a 14-minute episode where it's devoted exclusively to the amateur's mind. So I'm not going to get into the weeds of it now. But I'm going to make a statement that might sound a little over the top, but allow me to kind of explain what I mean. And here it is. If you haven't read this book, The Amateur's Mind by Jeremy Silman, if you haven't read this, or if you have no intention of reading it, I don't consider you a serious improver. Again, that seems a little over the top, but this book is going to be much more valuable than some esoteric game collection of Grandmaster games that are going to go over your head. This book is just so important. And when I was teaching adult beginners, this was always their side project. Teaching beginners privately, like doing lessons, that's something I want to get back into. But when I was doing it, I told any student I had who was an adult beginner, I said, fine, we'll have the lessons and, we're going to do a number of things. But as your own side project, you need to read this book, regardless of how long it might take you to get through it. It is the foundation for everything. All right. It's kind of like if you build a house, if the foundation is not good, you could have, great walls and great flooring and wiring, all this stuff. But if the foundation is a mess, you're going to have problems with the house. It's the same thing with chess. If you don't have that good foundation, anything else you study that might be a little more advanced is not going to stick. And I know for me, this book was sort of a major tipping point in my improvement. Okay. I started out, I think after my first tournament when I was in my 20s, my rating was like 521. I mean, I can't even process a rating that low, but that's what it was when I started. And then I peaked at, I think it's 1885 or 1887. I don't have it pulled up in front of me. That's where I was about 4 years ago or so. Right now, I'm low 1700s. I've been bouncing back and forth. So my goal right now is to get it back over 1800 where it was. But one of the main reasons I got such a high rating, even though I started out so poorly, one of the things that helped me shot up was this book. And everyone I recommended to just raves about it. Everybody will message me or call me and be like, wow, I wish I had known about this sooner. This is the type of book that will make you realize what you don't know. Because very often, myself included, we don't know what we don't know. And this book just opens it up for you. It really explains the game, what your responsibilities are in the position, how the pieces work. It really just gets down to the mechanics of the game. And it's just so important. But I stick with what I said. If you don't plan on reading this book, I don't consider you a serious improver. That's how important this is. That's just my opinion. I realize some people are going to say I'm a little crazy saying that. But do this much at least. At least check it out. Like, give me that much. At least check it out. If you get it on Amazon, they have a good return policy or wherever you get your books. but at least look into it. Like, do that much, because I'm telling you, this book will be game changing for you. All right. Now, it's for intermediate and advanced beginners. I would say that's who it's designed for. But I will tell you right now, even players rated 2000 will get something out of it. I know off the top of my head, 2 players who were rated 2000 when they bought this book. Now, they got it because they heard good things about it. They got it through reputation, but they both felt that it was going to possibly be too easy for them. Yet both of these players, again, who were already rated 2000, said, wow, I got so much out of this book. So whether you're 1400, whether you're 2000, whether you're 800 or 1000, there's something there for you. And I cannot recommend this book enough. I strongly urge you read this first before any other chess book. I mean, obviously, I'm assuming you know how the pieces move, you know some basics, that type of thing. Let me go through some of the chapter titles. Like I said, I won't get into the weeds of it because I talked about that in episode 6, but just to give you a quick rundown, here are the chapter titles. So he talks about the imbalances, which are the differences in the position among players. All right. And he talks about the battle between bishops and knights. He talks about the acquisition of the center, territory, and space, the confusing subject of pawn structure, material, development and initiative, many imbalances, one board. These are all the chapter titles. How to play the opening, using the rooks, the curse of the mindless king hunter. That's a great one. Which side of the board should you play on? Developing mental toughness. And then he ends it with tests and solutions. It's so foundational in nature. And as I said, this book will really make you realize where your weaknesses are and will really make you just understand the mechanics of the game. And for those of you who may not be familiar with this book, like if you've never heard of it, what Silman did was during lessons with his students, which are all amateurs and adult improvers, he basically asked them to state out loud what they were thinking when he gave them a position. And he realized that they had erroneous thinking processes and errors that he never even imagined existed or could have existed, because many title players kind of take for granted that amateur players know certain things. And then what he did was he recorded all this, he wrote it down, and he put it in a book. It's absolutely fascinating. So again, I urge you to read it, but at a minimum, even if you're skeptical of what I'm saying, just at least check it out. Like, do yourself that much of a favor. I urge you. I really, really think it's going to help you. If you're kind of stuck in your current rating and you're very frustrated, like maybe you're rated 1200 and you just, no matter what you're doing, you just can't get to 1400, this book might be the push you need. So just check it out. The Amateur's Mind by I Am Jeremy Silman. It's on Amazon. It's readily available. I'll put a link in the show notes. Check it out. And just a comment about study material. This is something that I've mentioned before, and I know that Karsten Hansen, FM Karsten Hansen, mentioned this when he was on the podcast. This is something Levi Rosman has said. A lot of people have said this, and I certainly agree, which is that many amateurs, many adult improvers, especially a lot of like newer adult improvers because of the pandemic and the Queen's Gambit, the whole boom we're going through now, they're studying material that's too advanced for them. Like their study plan is very, very desultory, kind of all over the place. And they're studying books or courses, whether it's online, whether it's digital material or print material, that's just too advanced or not appropriate for them when there's other material that they should have studied first. And the problem is too, again, I've said this before, a lot of material out there, whether it's books, whether it's digital, it's often labeled as quote unquote appropriate for all levels. Or it'll say, well, this is appropriate for all players under 1500, or this is appropriate for all players under 1200. But the truth is that's often very inaccurate. A lot of times there is material that's really appropriate for players who are, say, 1600 and over, but it'll be labeled as being appropriate for all players. That type of thing. So that's another reason why I'm recommending The Amateur's Mind. because it'll act as a basis for more advanced material. It's kind of like if you're painting, I'm not an expert on painting at all, but like you have to put a primer down before you put a new coat of paint on, usually, right? And if you do these advanced courses or advanced books or whatever it is without having that primer first, it's not going to take that type of thing. So just keep that in mind, that don't be literal about the level that a course or a book or a video, whatever it is designed for. I mean, sure, there are times where things are labeled as appropriate for a certain level and it's correct, but other times it's not. So just be aware of that. Too many players are studying advanced material without having the basics down first. Something to be aware of. Next, I want to talk about studying using books versus studying using digital or online material, because it's something I think about. And I realized for me, while I love the online study material and the courses, while it's great, there's something about studying out of a book that is almost therapeutic and very transformative. And I realized what it is. I was thinking about this, like, why is it such a different thing? When you study with a book, I think it's a much more tactile experience, even if you're not using a board. Because I know when I study with a book, I usually have the board on the computer. I usually have Fritz. All right. Some people use a board, some people do both. But I like to use Fritz just because I can save it as a file, like in a database, and I can refer to it. But I realized with chess books, there's something about holding the book and looking at it and the physical experience of turning the pages where not only is it enjoyable, but here's what I discovered. I don't feel rushed. Like I feel like I can take my time. And let's say I want to get through a chapter, even if I don't get through the whole chapter, that's okay. But there's something very enjoyable and therapeutic about it. It's kind of like going for a light jog and really enjoying the experience and taking in the sights and trying to just run as fast as you can because you want to meet a certain threshold or something like that, but you don't enjoy the experience. That type of thing. What I realized with online material, which don't get me wrong, I do love and I do use. I mean, Chessable, chess.com, love that stuff. But what happens sometimes with online material, we get into a mode where it's more about checking a box and moving on to the next puzzle or video. Like there's this annoying sense of urgency that you don't get when you study with a book. Like when I'm studying with a book, I feel like I can really take my time, really absorb it and get into it. But with online material, I sometimes feel like it's more about completing the next puzzle and just moving on to the next thing. Like I feel rushed more. Maybe that's just me. I just kind of wanted to share that because that's kind of my thought process and something that I noticed. All right. So studying from books for me, it's a very, very different experience from studying online. And there are people in both schools of thought, like most people, many people like myself included. I like to do both. I like to study from books and use online material, even though, as I said, there are kind of benefits and disadvantages to some of them, depending on, I think with online study, I should say, there are some advantages and disadvantages. With studying with books, I think there's really no disadvantage, but something to think about. Of course, a lot of the younger kids, they pretty much do everything digitally. Some people who are more old school just want to study with books. A lot of people, as I said, like myself, do both. But again, there's a tendency with online material to simply want to move on to the next puzzle or the next video. And it becomes about completing it, like completing the lesson or completing the video or completing the course rather than really absorbing the material. So that's just a danger with online study that you need to be aware of. Now, speaking of online chess, I want to talk about playing online, and I want to make an observation. I think a lot of people don't take online chess seriously, and then they wonder why they're not getting better or why their rating isn't increasing. In other words, they don't treat it with integrity, which you need to do if online chess is going to be an improvement tool. And again, I'm referring to playing online, not studying. As far as playing games online, you need to stop playing on the toilet, in the doctor's office, at a meeting. You can't multitask. People think you can. The research is there, though. You cannot cognitively give 100% to more than one task. I know a lot of people can't play online chess without multitasking, or they find it difficult to, but I really think it can hinder your progress unless you're already a very strong player. Okay, I'm referring to if you're an improver. Now, if online chess is just entertainment and that's all it is, you just kind of want to move the pieces, have fun with it, you don't care, that's a separate discussion. But if it's something you're serious about and you want to improve and you want to use it as a tool to maybe help your over the board game, you need to take it seriously. Now, I rarely play at home lately just because of distractions and other things going on. Like for me, I'm the type, I need complete silence. Like it has to be like completely quiet or like a white noise machine. It pretty much has to be like I'm leaving the house and going to a physical club. Like those are the conditions that you need to emulate. Like if you're playing online and you're really serious about it, you want to get better, that type of thing, and you want to do well, you want a good performance, it has to be like you're at the club. It has to be like actual tournament conditions. And again, you need to emulate that as best you can. Not always easy to do when there's other people in the house and there's other things going on, and you know the laundry is staring at you and the dishwasher is staring at you and all these things that need to get done in the house are kind of shouting at you. I totally get that. But something to be aware of, you kind of need to isolate yourself and really focus. But a lot of people don't do that, and then they wonder why their performance is not good. Online chess can also be very, very addicting, right? You only plan on playing for 45 minutes, and it's that, oh, let me just play one more game, and then that becomes an hour, then it becomes an hour and a half, then it becomes 2 hours, and then you see how long you played, and then you feel guilty. And then if you start losing a few games, you want to get the rating points back, and then that can cause you to tilt, which means you start getting frustrated and you play poorly because you just want to get the rating points out. And then you end up like quitting. What do they call it? Like rage quitting, because you're doing so poorly. You just want to quit. And it becomes a frustrating experience when it should be an engaging and enjoyable experience. So with online chess, there's a certain amount of discipline that needs to be there if it's going to be beneficial to you. All right, so it's the age-old question. How many games do you need to play per year, over the board that is, to increase your rating, your USCF standard over the board rating? Now, I contend that 50 games a year, which is once a week, that's good, but technically that's not enough. Now, I know most of you would love it if you were able to play 50 games a year or approximately that amount. And you may be thinking, well, that's easy for you to say, Neil, you know, you run the club. Yes, and I absolutely don't take that for granted. It's something I worked hard at. We started in 2007 and I built it up. We're now the only rated club on Long Island. There was another one, but they moved to Queens, and we have good numbers. And yeah, I do get to play once a week. It's really more like 40 games a year for me, or maybe 38 because of buys and stuff like that. I can't make every round. Tim subs for me when I can't make it. But even still, while I appreciate that, I'm just saying technically, like from a literal point of view, as far as what you need to get better, I really don't think 50 games a year is enough. And I had a nice conversation with a fellow club member. This is maybe like 5-6 years ago. I'm going back. And he was, you know, he's around my age, around the same rating. I think at the time we were both in the low 1600s or something like that. We both had a little bit of a rating plateau. And he said to me, he goes, playing once a week, it's very hard to get your rating up. You know, he was saying it's very difficult to meet these rating goals when you only play once a week. And I agree with that. So here's the thing. Ideally, now this is completely unrealistic, but ideally, as far as I'm concerned, this is just me, Maybe a title player or someone else might disagree, but I think for most improvers, you need to be playing like 100 games a year for major improvement, for significant rating gains, like twice a week. But again, that has no bearing in reality. You have a job, you have a family. That's not going to happen. I mean, if you could do 70, that would be great. Like for me, that would be an ideal number, but that's not going to happen for me either. Why am I mentioning this? Because don't beat yourself up if your over the board rating is not increasing, if you're only playing like 10 rated games a year or 15 rated or even 20 a year. And, don't beat yourself up if you're only playing in 1 or 2 tournaments a year. You need to be consistently playing over the board in tournaments regularly if you want your rating to increase. That's just how it is. You have to play a lot. That's the reality. And there are certain things, I'll argue, that you're just not going to get from studying. Just playing a game, from start to finish, the endurance needed, using the clock, dealing with an opponent, dealing with nerves, time pressure, composure, even something like hanging pieces and making mistakes and rushing. I mean, you can study some of that to a certain degree, but ultimately there are some things you just need to play through. So if you're playing less than 50 games a year, don't beat yourself up if you're making very small gains in your over the board rating, because the reality is you really need to play a lot. Ideally, like I said, playing twice a week, that's what you want. But again, that bears no resemblance to reality. And I get that. Maybe down the road when I retire, maybe that's something I can look into. But even now, with my schedule and with stuff with work and family and buys, I do maybe 40 a year. It's probably a little bit less because there are some times I'll come to the club and if I'm just shot, I'll just take a buy. So I'm probably playing a little bit under 40. Even if I do 35, that's still probably better than average, and I don't take it for granted. But technically, it's very hard to boost your rating when you do that, because when you factor in some of those tough losses, when you factor in playing kids or other players who are like unrated, or they're rated like 1,000, but they're really like 15, or I should say like 17, 1,800 strength, and maybe you have a bad night and then you get knocked down like 30 points because of one loss. When you only play once a week, that's very tough to make up for that. So if you're playing something like 100 games a year, if you have a stinker of a game, you know that you're playing enough that you can make up for it. So the point I'm trying to make is, ideally try to shoot for 50 games a year, which I know is tough. But if you really want to see improvement, that's what you need to do. If you're playing less and that's all you can do, fine, enjoy it. Play less. If you can only play 20 games, if you can only play 10 games, do what you can do. I get it. We all have our lives and our responsibility. We can only do so much. But again, the point I want to, get across is that if you are playing only a few games a year, you can't be surprised that you might have trouble boosting your rating. You can't be rated, let's say you're rated 1,200. You can't play in 2 tournaments a year and expect that in 2 years it's going to jump to like 1,900. Probably not going to happen unless you have an inordinately good run of, tournaments, even though you're doing a few a year, something like that. So keep it in mind, if you can somehow down the road get it to a point where you're playing about 50 games a year or so, 50 games-ish a year over the board, that would be ideal. But if you can't, you can't. But just realize that the fewer games you play, the harder it is to really boost your rating. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because the conversation I mentioned with my friend at the club, it was just a really good back and forth. And it was interesting hearing someone else say, because I always felt playing once a week wasn't enough, but it was interesting hearing someone else say that, I really want to boost my rating, but it's very hard to do when you can only play once a week. And I think it's especially true nowadays, just because the game is harder. The players are tougher. The players are stronger. There's more material out there. Casual and hobbyist players can become decent tournament players relatively quickly if they're willing to put the time in and make the psychological and mental adjustments that they need to. But something to think about. So if you're only playing in 1 or 2 tournaments a year, it's going to be tough to boost your rating, and you may want to try to look to increase that if you can and if your schedule allows for it. But don't beat yourself up if you're having trouble boosting your rating when you're only playing in like 1 or 2 tournaments a year. That's kind of the point I want to get across. So just some thoughts there. Now, speaking of rating, one of the things that makes boosting your rating difficult is the rating system itself. Now, there's an old saying, chess hates the underdog. Very, very true. Statistically, most of the time, the higher rated player is going to win. And because of the standard Swiss system, which is awful, by the way, that's where, the top half plays the bottom half and winners play winners and losers play losers. Excuse me. I won't go into the whole thing now. I did a separate episode on that. But what happens is there's a couple of things. First of all, with the Swiss system, you get punished, quote unquote, punished after a loss by being pared down. So in other words, you lose a game. Most of us would love to kind of get back into it, maybe play someone who's rated the same as us or higher to kind of just get back into it, maybe make up for those rating points, but just to feel like you're playing a game where if you win or draw, you're going to be rewarded somehow. But what happens is the opposite. You lose, and now you get, again, quote unquote, punished by playing someone who also lost, who's probably going to be lower rated. So you get like a bad pairing. So it might take you another round or two just to get back to a decent pairing. So that's one thing. The other thing is, most of the time, myself included, higher rated players will not take a draw against lower rated players. And when the position is very, very even, that can be very frustrating because the higher rated player would probably take that draw in the even position against someone with a similar rating, or is more likely to. It's the old shopping cart theory. I'm just kind of applying that to chess. Let me explain what I mean by that. The shopping cart theory, I'm sort of doing an offshoot of that. It's this belief that you can judge a person's character based on whether he or she returns the shopping cart at the supermarket to the area where they collect the carts, or whether the person leaves it in the parking spot, right? So the theory goes that if you return it to the cart area, you're a quote unquote good person and you're, morally sound. Whereas if you don't return the shopping cart, then that means that, you're not a good person. I mean, I'm oversimplifying it. If you Google it, you can look it up. I'm not saying I agree with that. That's just a theory that's out there. And I know for myself, let's be honest, because I do the food shopping in my house. I don't like doing it online because I'm fussy about my produce. But anyway, think about, you go there, it's maybe a Sunday or a Saturday. I don't like going on the weekends, but that's usually the only time I can go. And it's crowded. You find a parking spot. And then what do you see? You see a cart there and you're like, oh, this jerk, you get annoyed that someone left the cart there. Oh, this person couldn't put it back. And what do you have to do? You have to stop the car, which could be dangerous in the middle of the lane. And then you have to move the cart and then put your car in. And then what do we do though? Right? When we leave, we were upset the cart was there, but what do? Let's face it. We all do it. Oh, you know what? This guy, you end up leaving it too, right? It's like the biggest double standard. You're upset that someone left the cart in the spot when you got there. But then when you leave, you end up doing the same thing. And I admit I'm sometimes guilty of that as well. I try to put it back, but I'm being transparent. And so you may be thinking, what does that have anything to do with what you're talking about? Well, in chess, the high-rated player, right? It's kind of like the shopping cart. He won't take the draw against the lower-rated, but then when that higher-rated player plays someone else who's higher than he is, he gets annoyed when his opponent won't take the draw, right? So, you're not taking the draw, I should say, against your lower rated opponent, but yet you'll complain that a higher rated opponent that you played didn't take the draw against you. And that's just how it is. That's like the double standard of chess. Because I know for me, if I have a dead even position against a lower rated player, or even if I think I'm a little bit worse, I'm not taking the draw because I have faith in my endgame skills. And I've been doing this long enough to know that the lower rated player will very likely blunder. But yet I admit I'm the first person to get annoyed if I offer a draw to a higher rated player in a very even position and he doesn't take it because I know he's not taking it simply because of my rating and he thinks I'm going to make a mistake. It's just one of the game's biggest, like I said, like double standards, so to speak. Now, I did have an incident where this came to light. This was many, many years ago. This was at the Queens Chess Club in New York. This was many years before I started the Long Island Chess Club. And I was playing someone rated over 2,000. I was maybe in the 1,500s at the time. Maybe I was 1,600. I don't know, but around there, 1,500-ish. And tough game. We're both positional players. And we end up with this very even, dry endgame. And we're both in a little bit of time pressure. So I offer the draw and he declines it. And I could tell he was like being a little bit of a jerk about it, almost like I was annoying him. I mean, I didn't do it in an unprofessional way. The position was definitely even and I wasn't doing it repeatedly. So he declines it. We then play on for a while and it's very clear neither side can make progress. It's very clear that I'm not making a mistake. He's trying all these things and I'm not falling for him. And I could tell he's getting frustrated because he's waiting for me to blunder, but it just wasn't happening. All right. So I'm feeling it. And so after a while, after at least another maybe 15 moves or so, probably more, I offer a draw again and he turns it down. And at this point, I kind of, not that I was giving him an attitude, but he could tell I was kind of getting upset. And then we keep playing and I kind of look at him. I mean, this was wrong. I admit I kind of lost my cool a little bit, kind of heat of the moment. And I look at him and I'm like shrugging my shoulders as if to say what are you going to do? It was like a very dry, like locked pawn. There were no breaks. There, in other words, there was nothing either side could do except shuffle. There wasn't like some crazy tactical shot. Like there was nothing like that. And finally, as both of our flags are about to fall, he like really reluctantly and annoyingly agrees to a draw. And, after the game, and again, this was heat of the moment, I said, if I were higher rated, you probably would have taken a draw. And he looks at me, he's like, well, I have every right, to play on if I don't want to take a draw. And I said, let me ask you, I go, if I were rated the same as you, 2,000, would you have taken a draw? And he was a little taken aback and he's like, oh, well, yeah, I guess probably. Well, I'm like, there you go. And I just kind of walked away, which was wrong. I shouldn't have said that. But I'm saying this just to demonstrate that it's very hard to boost your rating for that reason, because if he had taken the draw right away, I would have gotten the rating points. That would have been the end of it. But by not taking the draw, I also could have blundered and he could have won. But then again, I'm getting upset at him for not taking the draw, but yet if I were playing a low-rated player, I would have reacted the same way. Like I said, it's one of the double standards of the games, but it shows that as the lower-rated player, you have to work like that much harder to beat the higher-rated player and get the points against them, because most of them are not going to be willing to give you a draw unless they feel they're losing. So it's just something about how the rating system, there are some quirks to it that make it hard. I don't want to get into like it favors the higher rated players, but it's just between the Swiss system and the way the players are paired and the fact that even if you work really hard and you get an even position against a higher rated opponent, they're going to sweat you out because they're going to believe that you'll make a mistake. And like I said, it's frustrating because, you won't give the draw to a low rated player, but yet when we play a higher rated player, we expect them to give it to us. One of those things to think about. Wanted to throw that out there. And as you gain more experience in tournaments, you'll see what I'm talking about. All right, but something to keep in mind with the Swiss system, which is the most common method of pairing players. So just as a side note, before I continue our conversation, weather here in New York on Long Island is crazy. So I'm recording this early January, and it was 65 degrees outside today. I mean, just crazy. They say it's going to be a mild winter. I hope that that's true. I'm not really a snow person, but I left to just get a cup of coffee during my lunch break, and I had no jacket, right? Second week in January, and it was 65. Crazy. Good stuff. But anyway, I digress. Let's move on. I want to talk about a couple of sort of tricks you can use or tips to help you in an over-the-board tournament as far as dealing with tournament conditions and different types of opponents and just being at the board, that type of thing. And there's two things I want to talk about. The first thing is if you notice your opponent is very kind of OCD, very anal retentive about his or her chess equipment. Like if you see that, it should be more than just, wow, that person's really fussy about his equipment. That should signal something to you, which is that if you take them off book, you have a very good chance of winning. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. So when I say a player who's really like OCD or anal retentive about his pieces, what I mean is they're sitting there polishing their wood pieces with like the special polishing cloth, and they're placing each piece precisely on the center of each square. It's like geometrically perfect. They fill out the heading of their score sheet perfectly. It has like everyone's first and last name and their rating and the location and the city and the state and the round number and the board number, like all those boxes on the score sheet that most people don't bother filling out. They fill out all that stuff. And then when you're like 5 or 6 moves in, they write the name of the opening on the variation and the score sheet. You know what I'm talking about. And listen, I'm not, I have those tendencies as well. All right. So I'm like the pot calling the kettle black here, but you get the idea. But when you see a player like that and they're kind of over the top about it, try to take them off book, because those are the types of players. And I know I'm kind of like stereotyping. I mean, I'm half saying this in jest and I'm half being like serious, but those are the types of players who are real fussy about their equipment, where they just want to play regular chess, right? They just want to play E4 and knight F3, develop the bishop, castle. They just want to play regular chess, so to speak. So if you start with something like H4 or something kind of off book where they just can't play like they normally would, like their book openings, that can really throw them off psychologically. So for example, if I'm white, I might do D4, like bishop F4, like pretending to go into a London, then I'll play like H4 right away, which is actually a way that some guys do play the London. Or if it's someone who knows me, I might just play E4. Just if I like really want to mess with their head, I'll play like E4. I mean, I can do it. I'm a D4 player. You know that. That's really my thing. But I mean, I can play E4. It's not my favorite, but I mean, I can do it. But if I really want to go over the top, that's something I could do. But just something to keep in mind. And, what you need to do in general, you kind of have to read your opponents anyway. Like, even if they're not fussy about their pieces, if you just know it's someone who likes to play book lines and pet lines and who really gets uncomfortable when they have to go off book by move 5, you might want to mix it up a little bit. Something to think about and to add to your play, to kind of add to your bag of tricks. Nothing wrong with that. There's nothing unethical, because all you're doing is changing your move order and your move choice, which, you're perfectly entitled to do. But I just wanted to throw that out there. And then the other thing has to do with getting up from the board. Like, this is a big sort of discussion point where some people will say, don't get up from the board. You should stay at the board. You should focus on the position unless you absolutely have to go to the bathroom or something like that. You should never get up from the board. I just don't agree with that. I think getting up from the board during your game can be very effective. It keeps your head clear. If you start to get some brain fog, or if you feel like you're losing the thread, or if you're getting frustrated. See, if you start to get frustrated and you're not quote unquote excited to play, and you feel a sense of like, oh, I don't know what to do, the best thing to do is just get up and walk away. And then you'll come back fresh. And when you get up, don't start looking at other games. Just kind of get up, clear your head, get a drink, use the bathroom if you need to, maybe just look out the window. And then you'll come back and you'll look at the position with fresh eyes. You'll be amazed at what you miss. I know for me, when I get like that and I walk up, if it seems like a critical position, I'll often miss something that I completely didn't even consider. And it's usually a tactical thing. For example, a player will make a move in, kind of a tough positional type of, position, like it's very closed, a lot of pieces on the board, and you're not sure what to do, and you're coming up with a plan, and you're so focused on, let's say, square control or a pawn break that you don't even realize that he's threatening to win your knight or that he has a tactical shot. You're so focused on his positional ideas that you completely miss that he's threatening to take a piece. And I've done that where I've walked away and I was so focused about one aspect of the position that I was like, oh, wait a minute. Oh my goodness. He was actually trying to like win my rook or something like that. And when that happens, it's two things. First, I get really annoyed with myself that I didn't even see it right away. But then I'm happy with myself because you know what? I got up, came back, looked at it with fresh eyes, and I saw it. So if you're really struggling, and like I said, you're getting that kind of fuzzy brain fog and you feel like you might just kind of rush a move out, just get up, right? Like James Brown said, right? Get on up. Just remember James Brown. Anyway, if you're confused, you're not sure what to do, and like I said, you feel like you're losing the thread, just get up for a few minutes. It doesn't have to be a long amount of time. I mean, even if it's just for like 2 or 3 minutes, even if it's just for 1 minute, that can work wonders. Just look away and come back to it. There's that saying when you work on a computer to prevent eye strain and headaches, it's the 20-20-20 rule, right? I think it's every 20 minutes, look 20 feet away for 20 seconds, that type of thing. You should make a similar policy for yourself when you're over the board, because I think getting up can be very helpful. Now, the other thing is, because some people are going to say, yeah, but if you get up from the board, you might change your mind about a move and your first instinct is usually correct. That's not necessarily true. Now, let's take it to academia and education. Now, most people, and I thought this myself for a long time, the thinking is that, well, your first response is usually correct. When you take a test, whatever your first instinct is, that's what you should go for because that's usually correct. And if you change it, it's going to be wrong. That's actually not true. A slew of recent studies have shown that if you're not sure, when test takers change their answer, it was something like over 70% of the time, they end up changing it from wrong to right rather than right to wrong. So statistically, and according to these studies, usually if you're not sure, when you change an answer, you end up changing it to the correct answer. So I'm wondering if the same is true for chess. I don't have any data on that. Now, they call that first response bias, where you believe that your first choice is correct. But again, studies show that that's not true. So yeah, the bottom line is, if you're not sure what to do and you're scratching your head and your clock is ticking away and you feel like you're just going to kind of force some move that you're not sure about, just get up and walk away. Even if it's for a minute, come back to it, look at it with fresh eyes. You'll be amazed at what you see. I now want to discuss a very common pawn blunder. Now, this happens at all levels. All right, I've seen very strong players make this mistake as well, but certainly lower rated players make this all the time, especially if you're a beginner, maybe you're just getting into tournaments. And this is what it is. It's when you make a pawn move where it attacks your opponent's pawn, right? So you make a pawn move, it now faces your opponent's pawn diagonally, and then you only look at one response. So in other words, you make this move and you only look at, okay, if he takes, and then, so on and so forth. You look at lines only where he takes your pawn, and you don't look at other responses. Well, guess what? What if he doesn't take? What if he defends the pawn? What if he pushes the pawn? What if he does nothing in that area of the board and moves something else elsewhere? Did your pawn move open lines for his pieces or your pieces? In other words, the pawn move blunder that many amateurs make is they only look at one response, and that one response is usually, well, what if he takes? You have to look at both. You just can't analyze that one particular response. And the truth is those pawn moves can be very tricky because there's often a lot of possibilities. Like there could be something happening on the other end of the board that you're not seeing because you're just looking at this pawn move. But again, the main mistake is that they only look at when your opponent can take the pawn, and you have to look at other responses. Can he not take it, right? Again, can he simply defend it? Can he push it? Can he move another piece? Because remember, when you move your pawn to attack his pawn, right, he's technically attacking your pawn as well because they're facing off diagonally. Can he maybe move another piece? And then if you capture his pawn, his piece is going to be better. Like, you have to look at all this stuff. And again, the mistake that happens so often is that players only look at one response from the opponent. And again, that's usually if he captures. And the reason is most amateur players don't like pawn tension, right? So if there are two pawns facing off diagonally that can capture each other, we don't like to keep that tension a lot of the times. We like to resolve it. There's just something very uncomfortable about leaving it there and knowing that the pawns can take each other and not doing it. It's kind of like castling because you can. Like, there are times where there's space between your king and rook, but castling may not be the best choice because it can put your king in danger. For example, I play the French defense, you know that. In many, many lines of the advanced variation, you're better off not castling as black because your king is often safe in the center for quite some time because the center is closed. But many players will castle in the advanced French just because they can, and then white ends up with a very strong attack. All right, so something to keep in mind. So when you make these pawn moves, especially a move that attacks your opponent's pawn, don't just look at, well, if he takes, I do this, and those lines. You have to look at all the other responses if he doesn't take the pawn or moves something else. Very, very common mistake. Players of all levels can miss that, but at the lower levels, it's especially common. So that's something you want to be aware of. All right, so that's going to do it for this week. We really appreciate you listening. It means a lot. If you're enjoying the podcast, we would appreciate it if you would spread the word to your chess playing friends. You can give us a shout out on your socials. If you're on Twitter, you can give us a shout out there. Our handle is @thechessangle. And if you're really enjoying the podcast a lot, you can leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Really goes a long way to publicize the podcast, and we appreciate it. I know many of you have already. It means a lot. So again, all the best in 2023, and I hope you win your next game. Have a great day, everybody.